call us to order. The House will come to order. Whoever's in charge of the journal will now be in charge of the pledge. Representative Luck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I pledge allegiance
Mr. Gregorio, please call the roll.
Representatives Amabile, Arndt, Bacon, Baisley, Benavides. Representative Benavides. Representative Benavides is excused. Burnett. Here. Byrd. Representative Byrd. Bockenfeld. Bradfield. Caraveo. Carver. Catlin. Cutter. Doherty. Duran. Escar.
Good morning.
Exum. Froelich. Geithner. Gonzalez Gutierrez. Gray. Hanks. Herod.
Here.
Holtorf. Hooten. Representative Hooten is excused. Jackson. Judah. Kennedy. Kipp. Larson. Montine. Luck. Lynch. McCluskey. McCormick. Representative McCormick. McKean. McLaughlin.
Present.
Michelson Janae.
Present.
Mullica. Neville. Ortiz. Pelton. Pico. Ransom. Rich. Ricks. Roberts. Sandridge. Sirota. Snyder. Soper. Sullivan. Tipper. Titone. Valdez. Representative Valdez A. Representative Valdez A is excused. Valdez D. Van Beber. Van Winkle. Weisman. Will. Williams. Woodrow. Woog. Young. Representative Young. And Mr. Speaker.
'63 present, 2 excused. We have a quorum. Representative Luck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the Journal of Monday, March 29th, 2021 be approved as corrected by the Chief Clerk.
You have heard the motion that the journal be corrected by the Chief Clerk. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Announcements and introductions. Representative Soper. And Representative Caraveo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have a tribute that we would like to have read in honor of National Doctors Day.
Sure. Members, we have a tribute. We have a tribute. Please direct your attention to the well.
State of Colorado, the House of Representatives convened in the 73rd General Assembly hereby recognizes National Doctors Day. National Doctors Day is a day to celebrate the contribution of physicians who serve our country by caring for its citizens. The first Doctors Day observance was March 30th, 1933 in Winder, Georgia. Eudora Brown Allman, wife of Dr. Charles B. Allman, decided to set aside a day to honor physicians, and the date chosen was the anniversary of the first use of general anesthesia in surgery. On March 30th, 1842, in Jefferson, Georgia, Dr. Crawford Long used ether to anesthetize a patient. James Venable excised a tumor from his neck without the patient feeling any pain. Though there is some controversy as to which doctor discovered anesthesia, Dr. Long is widely accepted today as the pioneer of surgical anesthesia through inhalation of ether. The first observance included mailing greeting cards and placing flowers on graves of deceased doctors. In 1858, a resolution commemorating Doctors' Day was adopted by the U.S. House of Representatives. In 1990, legislation was introduced in the House and Senate to establish a National Doctors' Day. Following overwhelming approval by Congress on October 30th, 1990, President George Bush signed the law designating March 30th as National Doctors' Day. Observing National Doctors' Day this year is especially important as we acknowledge the hard work of doctors throughout the COVID-19 crisis. Doctors across the state perform duties that are vital to health, safety, and well-being of all Coloradans, despite increased risks of the virus. They have bravely performed life-sustaining services amidst over 400,000 cases of COVID-19 in Colorado, saving countless lives and preventing further spread of the virus. On request of Representative Matt Soper and Yadira Caraveo, given this 30th day of March, 2021, State Capitol, Denver.
Representative Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, members, happy Doctors' Day, and I just want to thank one of our own, Representative Dr. Caraveo. But we're also joined by other doctors who Representative Caraveo is going to recognize in a minute. But I just want to deliver a few remarks. Colorado and the world have been through once-in-a-century pandemic, and it's been through our physicians that have provided unmatched care in the face of unprecedented uncertainty, stress, and demands for medical care. With the roughly 7,500 physicians who provide medical care for the 5 million Coloradans across this great state, doctors have top-notch medical treatment, and Colorado has a history of some of the best physicians in the entire nation. A year ago, as some of you may remember, I was elected to the Delta Hospital Board, and certainly at the start of the pandemic was an interesting time to join that board. But I've gotten to know since then doctors on both a professional and a personal level, including watching a surgery in January, standing just a few arms lengths away from the surgeon. To me, it looked a bit more like watching a carpenter, as there were rods, screws, hammers. It certainly was not what I expected in an operating room, but the professionalism and the knowledge that the surgeon exhibited through anatomy and being able to tell me which vein he could give up and which vein he needed to preserve to save the patient's life was truly remarkable. It was watching the miracle of modern medicine at work to repair the leg of the patient, to allow the patient to walk again and enjoy life. Doctors do that day in and day out, regardless of if we're in a pandemic or not. And I was telling our guests in the gallery that during the pandemic, citizens might not necessarily care what each one of us has to say as politicians, but they definitely respected and took heed of the advice that their physicians and doctors told them, and that doctors throughout this pandemic have really been the stabilizing force of our community and our state. And we're certainly fortunate to have them and to recognize their service, because I can only imagine being on the front lines for so long and all the stress that they've had to go through.
Sorry, Representative Caraveo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you so much to Representative Soper for bringing this and including me on this tribute today. Usually Doctors' Day is the day that maybe you're in the hospital, they put a sign up, maybe they have a special breakfast, and then you kind of move on and you see your patients and you forget about it for the rest of the year. But it is very nice, in particular after the year that we've had in medicine, to pay a more formal tribute to people who spend their lives taking care of patients. I think it is particularly adequate that, or telling that Doctors' Day was established on a day that we made a breakthrough for our patients in being able to provide them anesthesia during during procedures. But being a doctor, I've said to many of you before, something that it's not just a job. Once you decide that you are going to go into medicine, you really are on the path to a calling. Whether it's, you spent high school preparing to get into a good college, to get into a good medical school, to get into a good residency, and then spend what is supposed to be only 80 hours a week during residency, to specialize, whether you're there 30 hours straight without sleep, or spend the rest of your time reading literature to ensure that you can take the best care possible for your patients. This is never going to be, never has been a 9-to-5 job. And so when we went into this pandemic, which I think we all anticipated, when I was in my last year of medical school was when swine flu was really kind of turning into an epidemic that we were luckily able to temper. I remember having conversations with my classmates saying, how many of us are going to die because of this epidemic? We were able to temper that epidemic in a way that we did not with this pandemic. And we have lost many doctors and other healthcare providers this year who devoted their lives to taking care of patients and at the end of the day gave their lives because they were taking care of their patients. So this year, as we mark Doctors' Day more formally, I ask that you all reach out to somebody who has devoted their life in the last year to take care of your patients, to take care of their patients, to take care of your loved ones, because we don't always get thanks. We don't go into this for thanks. In fact, we get it so infrequently that we share with each other, oh my gosh, that patient in that room just thanked me for everything that we've been doing this last year. And it's surprising. So reach out and thank them for what they've done this year, because it is not a job, it is a calling. And I would love to recognize 5 individuals who have made this their calling and have devoted their lives to taking care of their patients. 6, thank you. Dr. Dave Downs, Dr. David Markinson, Dr. Deb Parsons, Dr. Taman Osborne Roberts, Dr. Lee Morgan, and Brian Campbell, CEO of the Colorado Medical Society.
Representative Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to thank our guests once again, and thank you very much for leading and for being part of our medical community. Thank you.
Welcome to the House chamber. Okay. Representative Valdez. And Representative Ransom and Representative Mobley and others.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, we are joined here today, and we have requested that the flags here at the Capitol be flown starting today for the next 9 days, be flown for the victims and for honoring their families. For Denny Strong, Nevin Stanzik, Ricky Olds, Trolin Barkowik, Susan Fountain, Terry Leaker, Kevin Mahoney, Lynn Murray, and Jody Waters, and Officer Eric Talley. I thank each and every one of you, because we, as a General Assembly and a House of Representatives, need to continue to honor them. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Valdez. Representative Mobley.
So yesterday, they had a mass for Officer Talley, and today there's a memorial service at 11 o'clock in Lafayette. And Officer Talley didn't get to choose what happened to him last week. And his family didn't get to choose what happened to him. And their grief will last for the rest of their lives. They'll wear that grief like a blanket to keep them shielded from all the hurt that that's going to involve. So I just wanted to say how grateful we are that we have people who are willing to run in when the rest of us are running out. And I think this is an appropriate tribute. Thank you.
Minority Leader McCain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you all for your solemnity this morning. I drove to work this morning, and as I got to Highway 7, I saw a lot of lights. And if you know my drive down I-25 and you're paying attention to traffic, and saw a bunch of lights, and I thought, the Mass was yesterday. And then I thought, no, today is the day they lay him to rest. And as I got further down the highway, I saw a long string of law enforcement vehicles heading north to join that procession. This hangs on the hearts of us all. Those brothers and sisters were heading to lay their friend to rest. And it struck me as I see them driving and everybody going to work, and sort of this dichotomy of our lives, that here were lives that were absolutely interrupted. Those are the family and friends. The lives that were ended are a deep, deep hurt that will last here, I think, forever for all of us. But those lives interrupted, as Representative Amable said, those memories, these moments, that is that blanket around which they can pull and say, let's keep out the worst of the hurt. Today, a good man gets laid to rest. We will see services as we go forward in the coming week. And thank you all simply for recognizing this. Thank you for the tribute of flying these flags of service over our capital to offer some tiny solace to those families.
Representative Ransom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. These flags that were flown over the Capitol, there will be 9 more sets given to each, so that each family can get a set of flags that were flown over the Capitol. And as you've heard, today is the service of Officer Talley. And when I was on my way up from the south part of town this morning at 7 a.m., I had some patrol cars pass me as well, and I immediately knew that they were on their way to the service. And I know that you're all invited every week to the Legislators' Bible Study. This morning we were praying for all the victims, including and especially those of Officer Talley's family. I'm sure you've heard, well, it's from A Tale of Two Cities, but no greater love has this than when someone lays down their life for a friend. And Officer Talley did do that. I'm sure you've been hearing the stories. He ran into the building right when he got there, knowing that there was danger, hearing shots, knowing the risk he was putting himself in, yet immediately just ran in. And I think we all need to thank him. And as we heard from Representative Amable, the pain does not stop now. It will go on for many, many, many years. And actually, in some ways, it never goes away. When Mrs. Talley has to go walk one of her children down the aisle because Dad isn't there to do it, I can tell you right now, her heart's going to break all over again when one of her kids graduates from high school and she has to go there and kind of be the only parent watching that. Again, this is just the beginning of a journey that she has to walk, as well as the children's, his kids will have to. So with that, if we all come alongside, this is such a small step to give them flags, but I think sometimes the little steps are just we're laying the foundation of the stones that I hope will build up that road over many years to come. And I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, members. Further announcements and introductions. Minority Leader McKean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My mom turns 85 years old on Thursday, and I'm going to go see her. So I have asked for and received permission to be absent on Thursday. I will go to St. Louis, and I will be with my mom, who I have not gotten to see for 2 years, because she said, don't come see me while this is going on. So thank you, and I will wish her all the best from all of you.
Permission to be excused approved. Representative Weissman.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Speaker and members. These are a few announcements about Judiciary Committee's calendar today and tomorrow. So this morning on adjournment, we'll hear one bill, Senate Bill 75. This afternoon, we will hear 1194 and 1209. For tomorrow, I'll announce tomorrow, but I just want to call members' attention. We will have some amendments that will be distributed by legislative staff. Please watch your email for amendments that will be pertinent to tomorrow, specifically for 1101 and 1142. And members, you might have noticed that going between yesterday and today, we pulled 1211 off the calendar today. The reason for that actually relates to what we just heard about. 1211 was a bill that the County Sheriffs of Colorado as an organization was interested in because of what happened last week and the commemorations that are happening this week. The sponsor decided, it would be appropriate to create a little bit more time and space and let sheriff's deputies and organizations and the CSOC as a whole get through this week, and then we'll bring that bill up next week. So I wanted folks to know that. We'll see everybody in Judiciary later today.
Representative Lantine. Oh, yeah, we'll go Lantine and then I'll go remote.
Good morning, members. Health and Insurance meets today upon adjournment in room 112. It's Sunset Day in Health and Insurance, and we will be hearing 4 bills that are sunset bills: Senate Bill 102, Senate Bill 92, Senate Bill 93, Senate Bill 97. If you have one of those bills on the calendar, please be prompt. Thank you.
Representative McLaughlin.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Education Committee, we've had a little change of plan for tomorrow. We will not be listening to House Bill 1029, but we will be listening to Senate Bill 157. So same time, same place, and we'll see you there. Bye-bye.
Representative Michelson-Jeannet.
Thank you, and I apologize in advance. My dogs are going crazy. Members of the Public Health and Human Services Committee, we will be meeting at 1:30 today in room 112 with our guest chair, Emily Sirota, because I have permission to be excused this afternoon to take care of this. So we will be hearing Senate Bill 122, House Bill 1222, Senate Bill 115, and House Bill 1166. Don't be late. Thank you.
And in that vein, Representative Duran will replace Representative Michelson-Jeannet on Public Health Committee for today only. Representative Exum.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House Transportation Local Government Committee will be meeting this afternoon to hear House Bill 1056, Representative Pelton, for action only, and House Bill 1186, House Bill 1095, and House Bill 1225. LSBA. See you there. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Exum. Okay, seeing no further announcements or introductions, the next order of business is third reading of bills, final passage. Mr. Gregorio, please read the title to House Bill 1153.
House Bill 1153 by Representatives Arndt and Valdez-D, also Senator Moreno, concerning the repeal of the Enterprise Zone Child Care Contributions Income Tax Credit for income tax years commencing prior to January 1, 1999.
Assistant Majority Leader Gonzalez Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move House Bill 1153 on third reading and final passage.
The motion before us is the adoption of House Bill 1153 on third reading and final passage. Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Gregorio, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Okay, those participating remotely, Representative Burnett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Burnett votes yes. Representative Harrod, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Harrod votes yes. Madam Majority Leader, how do you vote?
Yes.
Madam Majority Leader votes yes. Representative McLaughlin, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative McLaughlin votes yes. Representative Michelson-Janae, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Michelson-Janae votes yes. Representative Young, please close the machine. 63 aye votes, 1 no vote, and 1 excuse. House Bill 1153 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Representative Michelson-Janae, co-sponsor. Please close the machine. Mr. Gregorio, please read the title to House Bill 1155.
House Bill 1155 by Representatives Arndt and Pico, also Senators Zenzinger and Woodward, concerning modifications to the sales and use tax statutes in order to address certain defects and anachronisms.
Assistant Majority Leader Gonzalez Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move House Bill 1155 on third reading and final passage.
The question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1155 on third reading and final passage. Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Gregorio, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative Burnett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Burnett votes yes. Representative Harrod, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Harrod votes yes. Madam Majority Leader, how do you vote?
Yes.
Madam Majority Leader votes yes. Representative McLaughlin, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative McLaughlin votes yes. Representative Michelson-Janae, how do you vote?
McLaughlin votes yes. Representative Michelson-Janae, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Michelson-Janae votes yes.
Representative Michelson-Janae.
Representative Larson and Neville. Please close the machine. With 64 aye votes, no votes, and 1 excuse, House Bill 1155 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Gregorio, please read the title of House Bill 1156.
House Bill 1156 by Representatives Lynch and Pico, also Senators Kirkmeyer and Zenzinger, concerning the correction of statutory defects related to severance tax withholdings from a disbursement to an oil and gas interest owner.
Assistant Majority Leader Gonzalez Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move House Bill 1156 on third reading and final passage.
Question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1156 on third reading and final passage. Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Gregorio, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative Burnett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Burnett votes yes. Representative Harrod, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Harrod votes yes. Madam Majority Leader, how do you vote?
Yes.
Madam Majority Leader votes yes. Representative McLaughlin, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative McLaughlin votes yes. Representative Michelson-Janae, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Michelson-Janae votes yes. Representative Lontine and Van Beber. Please close the machine. With 64 aye votes, no votes, and 1 excused, House Bill 1156 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Gregorio, please read the title of the House Bill 1157.
House Bill 1157 by Representatives Arndt and Lynch, also Senators Kirkmeyer and Woodward, concerning the accurate statutory reference to the types of taxes administered by the Department of Revenue for purposes of administrative requirements.
Assistant Majority Leader Gonzalez Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move House Bill 1157 on third reading and final passage.
Question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1157 on third reading and final passage. Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Gregorio, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative Burnett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Burnett votes yes. Representative Harrod, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Harrod votes yes. Madam Majority Leader, how do you vote?
Yes.
Madam Majority Leader votes yes. Representative McLaughlin, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Representative McLaughlin votes yes. Representative Michelson Janae, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Michelson Janae votes yes. Assistant Majority Leader and Representative Holtorf. Please close the machine. 64 aye votes, no votes, and 1 excuse. House Bill 1157 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Please close the machine. Mr. Gregorio, please read the title of the House Bill 1143.
House Bill 1143 by Representatives Froelich and Soper, also Senator Danielson, concerning forensic medical evidence of sexual assault.
Assistant Majority Leader Gonzalez Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move House Bill 1143 on third reading and final passage.
Question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1143 on third reading and final passage. Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Gregorio, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative Burnett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Burnett votes yes. Representative Harrod, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Harrod votes yes. Madam Majority Leader, how do you vote?
Yes.
Madam Majority Leader votes yes. Representative McLaughlin, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative McLaughlin votes yes. Representative Michelson Janae, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Michelson Janae votes yes. Please close the machine. 64 aye votes, no votes, and 1 excuse. House Bill 1143 is adopted. Co-sponsors. Representative Harrod, Burnett, Michelson Janae, McLaughlin, and Madam Majority Leader co-sponsor. Please close the machine. Mr. Gregorio, please read the title of the House Bill 1066.
House Bill 1066 by Representatives Bockenfeld and Michelson Janae, also Senators Smallwood and Woodward, concerning the modification of monthly financial reporting requirements of the Department of Transportation.
Assistant Majority Leader Gonzalez Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move House Bill 1066 on third reading and final passage.
Question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1066 on third reading and final passage. Seeing no further discussion, Mr. Gregorio, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Representative Burnett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Burnett votes yes. Representative Harrod, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Harrod votes yes. Madam Majority Leader, how do you vote?
Yes.
Madam Majority Leader votes yes. Representative McLaughlin, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative McLaughlin.
Yes.
Representative McLaughlin votes yes. Representative Michelson Janae, how do you vote?
Janae, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Michelson Janae votes yes. Representative Snyder, Representative Ricks. Please close the machine. With 64 aye votes, no votes, and 1 excuse, House Bill 1066 is adopted. Co-sponsors. I will say that was the longest streak of 64-0 votes we've seen all session. 1 no vote all day, and I think that was Representative Van Winkle. Okay, co-sponsors, please close the machine. The next order of business is a second reading of bills, general orders. Representative A. Valdez. You have heard the motion. Seeing no objection, Representative A. Valdez will take the chair.
The committee will come to order. With your unanimous consent, the bills will be read by title unless there is a request for reading a bill at length. Committee reports are printed in your bill folders. Floor amendments will be shown on the screen and on your iPads. Bills will be laid over upon motion of the majority leader, and the court rule is relaxed. Mr. Gregorio, please read the title to House Bill 1121.
House Bill 1121 by Representatives Jackson and Judah, also Senator Gonzalez, concerning protections for residential tenants related to actions by landlords.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the Business Affairs and Labor Report and House Bill 1121.
To the committee report.
In the committee, we reduced the timelines relating to when a person could be evicted, and we struck all other timelines and processes, so they remain what is currently in statute. I ask for an aye vote.
Further discussion on the committee report. Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the committee report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee report is adopted. To the bill, Representative Judah.
It is an honor to serve with you.
And an honor to serve with you.
This bill gives tenants the opportunity to stay housed, and it gives landlords more security, and I ask for an aye vote.
All right, any further discussion on House Bill 1121? Seeing Representative Geithner.
Thank you. And so members, just coming to learn a little bit about this bill and understanding a little bit about what it does, I'd like to move L010 and ask that it be displayed.
All right, the amendment is moved. Just hold on 1 second while we get it up.
I know, I always do that.
All right, L010 is displayed. Please proceed, Representative Geithner.
And so, members, what L010 simply does is it just encourages a written, whatever that agreement may be between the landlord and the tenant to be written. Sometimes there will be transactions that take place where a landlord will offer a property to a tenant. It's more of a handshake, if you will. This amendment simply just says, hey, let's go ahead and put that in writing so that there's protections on both sides for not just the landlord, but also for the tenant as well. And that's simply what L010 does. And so, members, I would encourage a yes vote.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this is current law. I ask for a no vote.
All right, further discussion on L010? Seeing none, the question of Representative Gray.
No, just literally, this is in the, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is in the legislative declaration. The second part looks like it's trying to create law. And normally we don't put positive law in the legislative declaration. Not to be too big a nerd for everybody, but this is an amendment to the legislature. And so, I mean, I'm not even asking for a yes vote or no vote. I'm just saying as far as a matter of us creating law, the second part looks like it's trying to tell people they have to do something, and it's written in the legislative declaration, which is not normally what we do.
Further discussion on the amendment. Representative Van Winkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps we need just a bit of a recess here, because the way I'm reading it amends section 13 of the bill, which is that it adds language at the end of the bill just before the safety clause. And my apologies to the bill sponsor also. I wasn't able to understand the objection.
All right. Any further discussion on L010? Representative Soper.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, first of all, I'd just like to counter this is not current law. And second of all, this encourages that there's a written notice that exists with leases. And I believe this is very important that we have in Colorado law. Thank you.
All righty. Further discussion on L010? Seeing none. Question, Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I think this is coming from the notion that the law prefers things reduced to writing, and that's true as a general matter. Look, I think the spirit that the bill is coming from, and the reason I did something I don't always do, which is I lent my name to the bill pre-introduction, is because in parts of our state, frankly, we have a rental housing crisis already. I think if we were to get data, and I don't even know how we would get this, I think the data would show overwhelmingly that lease agreements are in writing. It's better that way. The law right now allows an oral short-term type of agreement, and where that sort of thing works for parties involved, I think it should be allowed to work. My concern here with this is it is going to potentially operate to the detriment of people who, for whatever reason, may find themselves in a short-term oral lease kind of arrangement. And the only thing worse than being in a short-term, tenuous, costly lease is being in none at all and being out on the street or couch surfing or sleeping in your car. So I'm going to ask for a no vote on this amendment for those reasons.
Representative McKee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I sometimes it's worth paddling the canoe a little bit. So we heard that this is in current law, and then we heard that agreements are written. However, if we go to page 13 of the bill, what we hear is that notwithstanding any other law in a residential tenancy in which there is no written agreement between the landlord and tenant, then section B, a landlord may not terminate a residency tenant in which there is no written agreement. And then we get back to page 14, whether there's a written rental agreement for the tenancy, and these are all conditions. So what we're doing is actually referring to things that must be written in case there's not a written agreement. So it does seem like there is this gap in law. So I would ask you to hold on to the direction of whether or not to vote for this amendment until we determine what is current law. It seems to me that in this, we are either creating a gap or a parens in current law that says that if you choose not to have a written agreement, then these things must be done. This simply encourages the written agreement.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Representative Valdez. And so we just heard from the sponsor that it's already a part of statute. So I'm going to read a little section here from 3812-801, written rental agreement, copy tenant. And the actual sentence starts off with if there is a written rental agreement. And then it talks about the landlord shall provide the tenant with a copy. But the key word there is if. So I would argue that at least as I'm reading this, that there is no requirement for a written agreement. Therefore, the handshake can take place. Therefore, the need for L010. So unless I'm reading the word if wrong, hopefully the sponsors can correct me where it already exists in statute if that is the assertion where I read the word if there is a written rental agreement.
Further discussion on L010. See, Representative Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I rise in support of the amendment. I think it's really important that this body right here encourages landlords to provide a written agreement or to have a written agreement rather than an oral contract. It makes basic sense rather than having to sort out the terms of an oral agreement to reduce it to writing so that both parties understand what they're getting into. And I would encourage a yes vote. Thank you.
All right. Further discussion on L010. Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of L010. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
The noes have it. The amendment is lost. To the bill. Any further discussion? Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, now that we're back to the bill, I want to say what this means for my city and my district, which is Aurora. A lot of times here, a member representing some part of the state will come to this well and talk about the realities of that part of the state, that district, and why the rest of us in here need to really hear that and listen to that. And that's entirely fair. The rural parts of the state, the agricultural parts of the state, they are different than the Front Range. And it is the job of representatives to bring those realities to the rest of us, and we need to hear that. I think that's entirely fair. So, as a representative from Aurora, which is a place that, within the lifetime of everybody in here, had a reputation, a correct reputation for being an affordable place to live, I need to share some of the realities of what renters in my city are dealing with. This is from a newspaper article about a year ago, and it was looking at and analyzing data from Zillow, which I think we all know. Median rents in Aurora jumped 73% between 2010 and 2019, from $1,190 to $2,060, putting the Denver suburb the top of a list tracking changes in housing costs in 100 large cities across the United States. Denver came in fourth. The rate of rental increase is higher in Aurora than in Denver. Aurora's 73% rise was significantly faster than others in the top 10. Number 2, Boise, Idaho, of all places, the rate of increase was only 53%, 20 points lower. Nationally, the median went up 21.3% in the same time period. So, in my city, over the comparable time period, rents increased 3.5 times the national median rate. It is a real problem. It is squeezing people out. And what I want members here to understand is just to grapple with that reality, grapple with what that rate of increase means if that were happening to your constituents that you're here to represent too. That is why we see a bill like this. That is why I'm in support of a bill like this. And that is why, regardless of the district that you represent, I hope you will think about supporting this bill too. Thank you.
Representative Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to rise in strong opposition to this bill. And I receive emails, but I also receive phone calls from landlords. But this one I just received yesterday, and I thought it was appropriate to read because he is looking for help. Many years ago, I purchased a small 2-bedroom house as a rental property to supplement my retirement. In November, my renter decided to no longer pay rent, not because he was unemployed, but because there was a moratorium that kept him from me from evicting him even when he didn't pay. He did sign the CDC form, but since that time I have received no rent and no partial payment or any desire on his part to pay rent. I have asked him if he is intending to pay any part of the rent, and his answer was no. He gets a stimulus check, but still pays no rent. The government continues to reward bad behavior and punish people who are trying to make a living. He also has a car payment of nearly $600 and manages to pay that. Is there any way I can apply for relief? His rent is $800 a month and he hasn't paid since November. So these types of bills, and we see them come often, are just punishing bad behavior, and I ask for a no vote.
Further discussion, Representative Woog.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a number of things that I'm not comfortable on with this bill. I'm just going to speak to the eviction process. Currently, if a landlord wins a judgment, the tenant has 48 hours to be removed from the property. And the bill is asking, of course, to extend it to 14 days. There's already a period here that the tenant likely has not been paying rent. That's the most common reason for evictions. There are others, of course. So this landlord's been dealing with trying to get this rent in, oftentimes asking multiple times, trying to work with the tenant. So we're just extending this for a long period. And the fact is, there are many, maybe even some of you out there that own one property, and it's a nest egg for you. And this just creates a huge problem. This isn't affecting only, massive property owners. It was mentioned up here how high the rents are in Colorado, and heck yeah, they are very high here. And guess what? We have a high cost of living. The more and more regulation that comes through is going to increase the cost of living, and the rents are going to only go up. So, unfortunately, the facts are the facts, but this bill is going to hurt a lot of people, and it's also going to hurt the economy. While it's important to help those in need, in my experience as a landlord, a property manager, most of them are very willing, especially in these times of economic stress for people, to work with tenants as long as they're willing and try and help them out. But this bill will be a definite negative impact on a lot of people. Thank you.
Further discussion on 1121, Representative Pico.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in very strong opposition to this bill. During my time on active duty in past, I was both a renter and a landlord. I've been on both sides of this equation. I'm also a representative of a front range, so we heard how terrible it is on the front range to rent property. Well, Colorado Springs is no different from that. Very high rents. The issue is getting a supply. It's an issue of supply and demand. If you don't have enough houses to rent out, the rents go up. That's just how it works. And if you have a surplus, then the rents go down. This bill will make it harder on landlords to provide that supply side of the equation. This is basic fundamental economics 101. If you make it harder for a landlord to deal with his property, he'll pull it from the rental market. I had to do that after losing thousands of dollars on rental properties where I couldn't get the guy evicted in a timely manner. I ended up pulling it. That didn't help the rental market. This bill will make it harder and harder to do that. We do not need to add economic illiteracy into law. Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion? Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Representative Valdez. And so, members, I just wanted to come back up and talk a little bit about some of the, I think, the inequity, right, that we're trying to put into 1121.
Representative Geithner, I'm just going to ask everyone to please keep it down. It's hard to hear up here.
Thank you, Representative Valdez. And so if we look at the Mobile Home Park Act, which is 3812-200.1, there is a section in here related to rental agreement disclosure of terms in writing, 3812-213, and it says the terms and conditions of a tenancy must be adequately disclosed in writing. Members, this is the only section of statute that deals with a rental agreement where it actually says in statute that it should be in writing, and yet we're looking at 1121. We just had an amendment, L010, that was attempting to do the same thing and bring some equity into statute where we already find an example of it, and it was rejected. You know, I think Representative Pico made a good point. You know, I come from El Paso County. We have quite a few military folks that pass through. Not all of their stays are 3 years, 4 years. Some can be 6 months. Getting transactions in place to find housing for service members to ensure that we are not only protecting service members but tenants seems to be appropriate, that we would ensure that we are being consistent with what statute already has for at least the mobile home parks, but apparently everything else we can just do orally. That protection, that writing is critical for the protection of the tenant, not just the landlord. And I think that if we're going to try and talk about protecting tenants, well, then it's important that we focus on a contract being in writing. I guess I'm a little perplexed as to why we would reject this and think that somehow putting a contract in writing is not appropriate. But I think the idea here is we're all trying to make sure that we are protecting our tenants. And in some cases, tenants in these transactions move incredibly quick. And I can't point to a better example than the military, where I've actually had a full move, and my only duration was 6 to 8 months. That's a fast timeline. And if you don't have things in writing, you can actually jeopardize and take protections away from the tenant. So if we're going to do some legislation that we're going to hope to protect tenants, I would think it would be wise for us to have writing and bring the rest of the statute into parity with what already exists, because right now the only tenants that actually truly have protection are those that live in mobile homes. If it's an apartment or an auxiliary dwelling unit or whatever else, the written requirement isn't there. Therefore, I would argue we're not trying to do anything to protect tenants. And so that's my recommendation. That's the reason I'll be a no. If we can get to a point where we can adopt some sort of an amendment that would require writing, or that would at least encourage, I mean, geez, that's kind of an easy way to go, right? Let's encourage it. Let's not at least require it, but encourage it. I guess that's a bridge too far. So members, I encourage a no on on 1121.
Representative Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also rise in support of what my good colleague from Colorado Springs was talking about. We definitely need to encourage, and this is a deficiency with this bill, that landlord-tenant contracts be reduced to writing. And having that in the bill would definitely greatly help. Some landlords don't use written agreements. They just have a conversation with the tenant, take the tenant's check, let the tenant move in. And while oral promises can be and are legally binding, They can also lead to a lot of legal problems in the future, particularly when you're talking about what the terms are, and if you get into any sort of a dispute about what those terms are. In Colorado law, as you just heard, mobile home parks require that the landlord-tenant contract be reduced to writing. But in other landlord-tenant contracts, they could be oral. This is very dangerous for not just the landlord, but the tenant as well. And it's very important that both parties to such a crucial agreement about where you live can understand what the terms are. So I would strongly encourage the bill sponsors to at least add some sort of language encouraging landlords and tenants to have written agreements. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Sandrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I stand in opposition of this bill, and I think I'm guessing everybody here knows about the housing crisis, and everybody here wants more housing for their districts. And so I think that the intention of the bill is truly genuine. But we're getting a lot of these bills that really defy economics and defy really reality. Anytime you beat up an industry, regulate them and tax them, you're going to get more of that commodity. And I like to look at this at a very macro level. Housing is a commodity. The more difficulty you make the more regulations you make in making housing and freeing up housing, you're going to have less of that commodity. Whenever you have less of that commodity and you have a strong demand, the prices are going to go up. So, what I do is I have a lot of people in my industry who own properties. And whenever these bills come up, just to amuse myself, I ask them what they think of these bills. And it's always 100% unanimous that they're against these bills. Because what it does is, it brings them one step closer of getting out of the rental market industry. Housing's at a high right now. A lot of these owners of these small properties have seen a profit on their investment. They're thinking of selling those properties now and getting out of the rental market. So, and just taking their profits from the principal, from the increase in their principal. So more or less, the more you beat up this industry, the owners of these properties will decide to take their profits, get out of the industry. Then you'll have a smaller rental market. You have a smaller rental market, prices go up. So these bills just do the exact opposite of helping people. They hurt people. So we need to look at basic economics. And if you want more of a rental market, you want more properties, then free up the market to make more. Make it easier for investors to find a profit in this industry, and you will get more investors, meaning more property. Economics 101. So let's really look at what we're doing here. And I know our intentions are genuine, but we have to look at basic economics and not hurt the industry, but help the industry. With that said, I ask for a no vote. Thank you.
Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I definitely appreciate my colleagues from the other side of the aisle taking a hard look at this piece of legislation. I will tell you that there are lots of people who have taken a hard look at this piece of legislation, and we negotiated quite a bit. And I will tell you that in those negotiations, the Colorado Bar Association, the Rocky Mountain Home Association, Colorado Landlord Legislative Coalition, Colorado Creditors Bar Association, the Colorado Apartment Association, the Realtors Division of the Colorado Bar Association, the Colorado Association of Realtors. Hey, guess what? They all said, you know what? This doesn't look too bad for us. We are not going to oppose your bill. As it relates to landlords needing to make sure that their tenants pay their rent, guess what? There's money out there that landlords can apply for on behalf of their tenants. The eviction process. We really didn't change much in the eviction process. It's not 14 days. It is a total of 10 days. We kept the 48 hours where the writ of execution could be written in, and guess what? A deputy can get in line to go to evict that tenant, right? Nothing has changed there. Supply and demand. Yeah, there's a big problem with the supply and demand. And you know what the problem is? The problem is that people can't afford to pay their rent. Rents have gone up, and so those so there's such a limited supply of housing stock. And as it relates to the inequities and the disclosures in writing, as I look at this amendment, in 2018, it was the apartment association who said, no, this is a bad idea. Ask for no, or ask for a yes vote on the bill.
All right, Representative Sandrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, not opposing something is a far stretch from supporting it. I've yet to hear any property owners that say, I love getting my power stripped. I love more regulation. I love more fees. I love people coming into my business and telling me what to do. It's just not going to happen. That's reality. So let's not give any impression that the owners of these properties want you to make their investment more riskier, because that's what we're doing. They're investing money on these properties, and this bill makes their investment riskier. Sooner or later, it's going to be too risky, and they will get out of this business. So don't be fooled. You're not going to find a big group of owners saying, please, government, strip me of my power, increase my risk. Just not going to happen. People are getting out. They're going to take their profits. They're going to get out of this industry, and there'll be less housing. This will hurt the most vulnerable among us. Let's be wise and vote this down. Thank you.
Representative Catlin, and members, it's getting loud again. Please keep it down. Rep. Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to serve with you.
An honor to serve with you.
Thank you. Members and bill sponsors, I want to bring up a question, and this is in all seriousness. In the bill, it says that rental agreements over 6 months would extend the eviction process by 23 days. But for rental agreements between 1 month and 6 months, the eviction process would increase by at least 51 days, 39-day of increase of notice, and then the additional 12-day increase after a judgment. The reason I'm asking this question is, doesn't that put more pressure on the short-term rentals that we are hoping that we'll find for transitional housing, for people that are just in the process of maybe they've decided they're going to live here, those kind of things. Even people that are needing help from us to get them off of the curb and into a house or an apartment. I just need to have a question. I question this because it seems like this is going to hurt the people that are the most at need in the worst time that we could do that. Thank you. I request a no vote.
All right, Representative Joda.
Members, the only timeline that has changed in this bill is if you are in fact issued an eviction. That takes it from 48 hours, we're tacking on an additional 8. Simple as that. I also want to say I myself am a landlord. And this is something that I'm willing to put into practice as a landlord. If many of you hate looking out the window and seeing unhoused people, this prevents that from happening. It's a reality check.
All right. Any further discussion? Representative Woog.
We got a few here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a property manager for well over 10 years, it's very easy to see that, and I think we can agree, this will make evictions a longer process, a more difficult process. We've talked about a greater risk because of that for landlords. What's going to inevitably happen is landlords, property managers, are going to raise their standards on credit reports, background checks. That will ultimately hurt more people that are renting because now they can't even get into a home. Because of that high risk, the credit reports, the background checks become so stringent that a lot of people can't even get into the homes they want. Thank you.
Representative Pico.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got to respond to a couple things that I heard in there. One of that was a misstatement of supply and demand. The statement was made that it's too hard to rent, the rents are too high. The way you solve that is by increasing the supply. You make more housing available. You don't make it harder on the landlord to rent their property. I'm going to take a little bit of exception to my colleague, Representative Sandrich. He said if you make it too hard, the landlords are going to take their profits and go away. I didn't take my profits and get out of the rental market. I cut my losses. I was losing thousands of dollars because we couldn't get people to pay their rent and I couldn't get them out in time. And after I did get them out, I spent thousands of dollars to renovate the damage that they left behind. That's what's causing your shortage of rental markets. That's why rents are so high. You don't have the supply. If you want to have increase the availability of rental properties, don't make it harder on the landlords. You make it easier, or you don't go down this kind of path. Again, this is raising economic illiteracy to a benefit, and that's just the wrong way to approach it.
Representative Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And can I tell you what an honor it is to serve with you?
And an honor to serve with you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, folks, I sit on the Business Affairs and Labor Committee, and there's a few things I think we need to remember here. This bill, the origination of this bill came from DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs. And this bill was heavily stakeholdered and compromised and come to a really forged, I think a really good final conclusion here. But you have to recognize, first of all, 94% of tenants through the pandemic, through December 31st, paid their rent on time. That's an incredible number in this what we've been facing. But a lot of people drained their savings. They borrowed from family members. They used stimulus money. They used everything they could to pay that. But DOLA came to the bill sponsors and said, we see a looming crisis here because a lot of this is going to run out. And we've seen that uptick in the amount of people falling behind in their rent in January, even more in February, and continuing on through March. So the idea for this bill was, let's give tenants a little breathing room. Let's give them the opportunity to access a lot of the things that are out there. And I also applaud landlords. I know so many who have renegotiated their lease, given tenants extra time, waived late fees, other things, even though there's moratoriums in place, which complicates the economics of the issue. But I think we should really be proud of our tenants and our landlords. Not everybody's a good actor, we know that. But all this bill is seeking to do is to give them that extra time to access assistance, to be able to stay in their home. If you followed the stories, there are stories of single parents out there who scrape by every penny they can to make sure they pay that rent, because they know that's the most important thing they can do for their children, is to keep a roof over their heads. So I just want to give you a little history on this. This is really a good compromise bill. I know some landlords have a little heartburn with the ability to increase rents and things like that, but by and large, I think we should be well supported, and I would ask you to support this bill also. Thank you.
All right, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to serve with you.
An honor to serve with you.
Thank you. Members, I wasn't planning on coming up and speaking, even though it's not third reading. But I just took exception to something I heard my respected colleague from Aurora say. And the idea that the root cause of the homelessness problem and that we're trying to address that with this bill is just so far off the mark, I just couldn't let it slide. You look at states like California with some of the most restrictive tenancy rules and the homeless problems that they're experiencing. Members, the reason we have a homelessness problem is because there is a lack of supply and because the rents in this state are too high. And if we are putting additional restrictions on landlords, that doesn't help the people who are living on the streets and the people who are incapable of getting housed in this current environment. The idea that making it more expensive for landlords to access capital by putting these additional restrictions on them, by inherently cutting into their ability to generate cash flow to service their debt, that is going to restrict housing supply. That is going to exacerbate the homelessness issue. There are going to be a few people that benefit from this bill that are currently in the housing system, but after a year or two, what we are going to see is rents getting raised even higher. People who were able to make their rents are now going to be priced out of the market, and they will either end up homeless or having to move, and that in and of itself is incredibly disruptive. So again, if we want to address homelessness, if we want to address the housing crisis in this state, we need to be increasing supply. We do not need to be tinkering with the rules, making it more difficult for people to adjust to market decisions, because I will tell you what the consequence of this will be. Rents will get more expensive because we are putting additional burdens. We are making it more difficult to make that profit margin. Rents will go up because of this bill and a number of the other bills that are moving through this. But the idea that this is going to do one iota to help one of those people behind us right now get into a house is ridiculous. So members, please look back. If you want to actually help the housing crisis, vote no on this bill.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Representative Valdez. And so, members, I wanted to come and respond to some of the comments I just heard prior to Rep. Larson, and that was the single parent and struggling to make ends meet. You know, I grew up in apartments all my life, duplexes, small places, when I wasn't living in a homeless shelter, right? So I've experienced homelessness. And this bill, the title, Concerning Protections for Residential Tenants Related to Actions by Landlords. You see, my mother was in a wheelchair. We couldn't get on Section 8 housing because the waiting list was too long. And so we had to take what we could get, and some of those landlords, we actually didn't have a written agreement. You want to talk about being yanked around. So while I think we're going to sit here and talk about how we're here to try and protect tenants, I've lived that and not had the protections. I've lived in the homeless shelter before, experienced homelessness, and I'm telling you that 1121 will do more damage to tenants than what it purports to do to be helpful. So members, speaking from personal experience, I ask for a no on 1121. I appreciate that there has been stakeholding, but maybe it needs more stakeholding. Maybe why settle for a good bill when it can be the best, right? So if we're going to really try and protect tenants, let's maybe see if we can't get an amendment or two on this that would actually help tenants, as opposed to kind of just going for good, not bringing equity into the bill with with mobile home parks and that, where we already have written agreements. Because I can speak about living in a homeless shelter for hours.
Representative Jackson. And members, please take your conversations off the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to my colleague, I very much appreciate you sharing your personal story. We all come into this building, I believe, with goodness in our hearts, and there is something that generally propels us to do the work that we do and helps to shape and form our values and what we believe in. I believe strongly that this particular piece of legislation will benefit tenants and landlords. And guess what? I too know what that shelter looks like, feels like, and smells like. Because I too slept in the streets, but blocks from this building that I now serve in. I have a visceral understanding of what it feels like to walk the streets at night so that you stay awake, so that you stay safe. I know what it feels like when you finally get into that building. You don't need a bed. You don't even need a stove. Just the fact that you have a door that you can lock, and that you've got a roof over your head so that you don't freeze that night. I know what it means to need to be housed. Look, he brought it up. This is my personal world too. This piece of legislation will help so many people and those landlords. There are so many good landlords out there. They need time to access the funds that are available to them. And if for some reason, within that 48 hours they are evicted, they can't come to a conclusion with their landlord, nothing is going to stop the sheriff from being able to go out and remove that person's possessions. But also knowing, when you're in that situation in particular, how long it takes to gather possessions and what it costs to replace those possessions. All this bill does is give people on the back end, they're evicted, on the back end, a moment to keep their kid's teddy bear, to have the blanket that their grandmother made for them, to walk out of that courtroom if they go to that courtroom and not have to rush home and beat the sheriff so that they can get their things. That's all a tiny bit of dignity. I ask for an aye vote.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Representative Valdez, and I'm not sure if that was a dressing down that I just received or not, but it was mildly offensive. I will say that I didn't bring up homelessness. That was the sponsors. That's why I brought it up. I was responding to something that I have personal experience with. And I think the argument that we're trying to get here is that sometimes there can be second and third term effects that would actually hurt the housing supply. So while we're trying to take this in a direction that maybe it doesn't necessarily need to go, we need to bring it back to the focus, and that is for protections for the tenant. I fundamentally disagree that if we're not going to allow for written contracts and just say that oral contracts are sufficient, having traveled that road and being yanked around by landlords in the past, that I think we bring it back to the tenant aspect. And if we're going to make it more difficult for landlords to provide a product, then we're only hurting tenants. So again, I didn't bring up the homeless thing. I was responding to that. And while I can appreciate your experiences, I didn't necessarily need to be talked down to. I urge a no on 1121.
Representative Backenfeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree with Representative Snyder. It is an honor to serve with you.
Well, thank you, Representative Backenfeld. It's an honor to serve with you.
Members, people help people. Government can't force people to help people. Now, I've never been a wealthy man. I never came from a wealthy family, but I did work hard and I did acquire some retirement funds that I wanted to reinvest. And I reinvested those retirement funds in a property in the Denver real estate market. And I found good tenants. And once I found good tenants, I realized real quick that if I could build a bond with that tenant and build a good relationship, keep the property up, I kept my rent below market. And why would I do that? Because I had less turnover. They were taking care of the property. They got a benefit, an economic benefit, by paying below market rents. I got a long-term investment for my retirement. So what happened? I come down here in the legislature and I see these crazy bills where we think that we are helping someone when we're hurting them. The risk that was the anti-landlord bills that you've passed over the past couple years have increased my risk as an investor in the Denver real estate market. I sold my property at top dollar, thank you, and I moved my money to another market, into another state. Now you tell me how that's benefiting, and I'm not the only one, you tell me how that's benefiting the people that you want to benefit. I think Representative Sandridge is right. These kinds of bills are hurting Colorado's real estate market. They're hurting them more than they're helping them. If my colleagues from Aurora, who I also represent, want to help the Aurora real estate market, then start taking the shackles off of the landlords and allow them to build these personal relationships with their tenants that are rewarding both the landlord and the tenant. And this bill doesn't do that. I ask for a no vote.
All right, further discussion on 1121. Representative Holtorf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask all of us to try to take a step back and take a deep breath. I know this is a contentious subject, and people have an emotional attachment based on their life experiences. But I want to talk to something that I think is quite ironic here to try to reach out to illustrate a very important point. There are reports that the housing market in the Denver metro area is behind by $10 billion in investment in new housing of all classes and types to meet what are real economic forces. Supply and demand forces that say we have a demand because more people are moving to Colorado, and we know this to be true. Yet the supply for housing is not meeting that. That's problem number one. Now, there's a lot of proponents in Colorado that are what they call the no-grow or anti-grow proponents. They're real and they're out there. I heard one of them testifying in committee yesterday. And I pointed out that, hey, you may not understand, but you're not going to stop this. Populations are increasing exponentially around the world, and there has to be an accommodation for these people. So we must prepare for that. Number one. This particular bill, and I listened to the cry of my urban cousin saying, hey, we've got to do something. We have a problem. And this is a very small attempt at a solution. But the problem is much larger than this bill or any amendment we could attach to Bill 211121. And this is probably my most important point. When economies are not healthy, people can't pay their rent. When people don't have jobs, people can't pay their rent. When we don't create conditions for a healthy, vibrant economy, then all boats don't rise in that rising tide. In fact, some of them get stuck in the sand. They get stuck in a sandbar and can't even float. So what is the real solution? Ladies and gentlemen, the solution cannot be found in this chamber. The solution is to open up the economy. The solution is to get the Colorado economy going again. The solution is to help create conditions that raise incomes for all Coloradoans. What are we doing in that regard? What are we doing in that regard? Because that ultimately is the best remedy. Now, you're not going to change rising rent in Colorado. You can't do it because those real economic forces are not going to stop as demand continues unless investors and the investment class and financiers and banks and other financial establishments begin building and investing in Colorado, metro, urban corridor, mountain, and rural. That is the solution, to create more housing for more people. Now, as I understand this bill, this is going to buy those tenants, if they're in arrears, a couple more weeks. It's going to buy them a little more time to stay in that property unless they can find remedy. And then I hear a plea over here that says, well, we need to get more money. We just need more time for more government money, more subsidy. Well, that's not a long-term solution as we wait for another COVID-19 bailout. And we put that burden on our kids and our grandkids because that money has to be paid in future time. Those trillions and trillions of dollars that we amass at the federal level that comes down to the states who are in dire straits, that money is paid for in future time. Let's understand this. So that's just a Band-Aid as we look at the larger picture. Now, I really appreciate the comment about tenants and taking care of the little people. I do appreciate that. And I appreciate the bill sponsor's intent. And I understand that the bill sponsors have had to make numerous concessions in committee to bring this forward to the second reading floor. I was really excited about the amendment that was proposed by Representative Geithner that said we had to have something in writing. Because I think that protects the tenant, particularly on the month-to-month leases, because there's nothing worse than a month-to-month lease, and then within a certain month, the landlord comes, or the property manager comes and says, well, your rent's going up by $200 or $300 because of supply and demand forces. And the median rent in Aurora, Colorado has gone up. And so we're going to have to adjust. I don't believe this goes far enough in one regard, but I also don't believe when we continue to look for government to solve the problems that we've created with our own policies that have created the problems and or exacerbated the problems, then we need to look at the larger picture. Let's open up the economy. Let's open up the state. Let's get back to work, Colorado. Let's get our people employed. Let's quit relying on government for a handout to try to cover and compensate for the real issues. Because Colorado and in this country, how long can we keep this up? How long can we throw another couple of $1 trillion on the table of borrowed money, borrowed on the backs of our kids and our grandkids? How long can we do this? Think about your children when they come up to work. How are they going to be able to deal with this when they have to pay even higher taxes than you've ever paid?
Representative Holtorf, to the bill, please.
So, with that, Mr. Chair, I still have strong reservations about the intent and the methodology behind this bill. But I do think we should seek a solution that may be an amendment to help protect the tenants. Thank you.
Representative Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, with this bill, Colorado will have one of the longest eviction processes in the nation. I hope you'll look at the big picture and take into consideration what the Colorado housing market will look like if even 10% of our rental properties are removed from the market and become owner-occupied. A decrease in available and affordable housing is the last thing that tenants need right now, and that is exactly what this bill is going to do. I urge a no vote.
Further discussion on House Bill 1121. Representative Sandrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I just want to address some of the things that were said, and actually an email that I received earlier about this bill. Somebody sent me an email against this bill and said that this is the argument between failed theory and economic reality. When we look at a situation the way we want it to be and not the way it really is. But I don't believe this is an argument against failed theory. This theory's been applied over and over. And it showed bad results for the most vulnerable among us. This is not failed theory. This is failed policy. This has been shown over and over throughout the United States to increase prices and will lead to more evictions. Over and over, these types of policies has shown this a result. This is not theory anymore. This is policy. And areas keep on doubling down on these policies, and it keeps on hurting more people. But let's talk about a group that we're talking about hurting people and people in devastation, but very few are talking about these mom and pop couples who buy these properties to use them for income. I used to work in the financial industry, and I met a lot of people who didn't like the stock market, but they knew properties. That was going to be their retirement. That was going to be their income. They use their retirement to buy a few of these properties, and they rely on this income, the rent from each property. They're not rich. They could barely make ends meet each month, but they rely on their tenants paying their rent so these property owners can pay their bills. But very few people are talking about these people. And we need to start looking at these people. And I think there's some mindset that everybody who owns a property is a major Fortune 500 company with endless pockets. We need to help the people who need help and not make it easier for the people who don't need help. We need to understand this basic forms of economics. And to another thing was said is, let's make sure we understand that these tenants, our people, are smart people. There's something that they need an extra hour or a few extra days to grab their personal belongings. When you're not paying your rent month after month, you know that you're in a rough time, and you know that if you continue not to pay your rent, for whatever reason, the end is coming. There is no shock. When you're not paying your rent, this is a bad situation for everyone, and everybody loses. So let's make it known that these tenants, they know what's coming. Let's make sure, let's try to make this situation as smooth as possible for all parties. And I ask for a no vote on this. Thank you.
All right, further discussion. Representative Woog.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are going to be unintended negative consequences. I think the co-sponsors or co-primes of this bill have good intentions, but unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of negative. And the reality is it will negatively affect way more renters, way more tenants than it helps. So I urge a no vote. Thank you.
All right, further discussion on 1121. Seeing none, the question before us, Representative Holtorf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for noticing. There is one more point I wanted to make with regard to this, and it goes back to the journey we've traveled the last 12 months in this country and in this state. Now, on our ranch, we provide housing for our employees because it's better to live on the ranch than try to commute 20 to 25 miles every day, 50 miles round trip to work, very long days. And I am working on a project to remodel one of our trailer homes so it's a nice place to live for our employees, because we really care about people, and I care about their living conditions. But here's what I found. As we went to purchase materials, and these are real landlord issues, the cost of materials has gone almost double or more. Why is that? Well, COVID-19, the ability to manufacture, the limitations in transportation, the reductions in the supply side forces with an ever-increasing demand. So you got to go back to Econ 101. That's one problem. So the investment in maintaining housing is going up significantly. Let's talk about the cost of labor, because there's not enough people to do all the work. There's not enough plumbers, there's not enough electricians, there's not enough carpenters. There's not enough of these people out there because of policy in the past that said, hey, don't worry about the trades, let's all go to college. Real policies that have real consequences. Now, earlier somebody mentioned failed policies. Well, if you're not meeting the demand of your state, if you're not meeting those demands in your nation, and policies have inhibited those things to occur, then they are not successful. So finding a carpenter is near impossible in Washington County. The waiting list goes back, in my little old county, less than 2,500 people. Good luck finding a carpenter, and if you get one, you're on a waiting list for months. 2 to 3 months. Plumber, 2 to 3 weeks. Electrician, the same, maybe longer. But what causes these negative effects? So as we try to promulgate public policy to fix things, maybe we ought to understand the genesis of those problems and how more bad policy doesn't fix bad policy. A lot of times we try to solve problems that we don't even understand or want to try to understand. But I will tell you, this bill is not going to solve the problem in Aurora, Colorado, or Denver, Colorado. If we think this is going to solve the homeless problem, then I'll go back to a previous message. How about mental health? I mentioned that in another area. Now, to the bill, thank you, bill sponsors, to the bill, appreciate that. I still have strong objections to this bill. And I appreciate the bill sponsors. I wanted to see if they're paying attention, and by gosh, they are. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, seeing no further discussion, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1121. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. 1121 is passed. Mr. Gregorio, please read the title to House Bill 1051.
House Bill 1051 by Representatives Geithner and Byrd concerning publicly available information about applicants for public employment.
All right, Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Representative Valdez. And so, members, stand before you with 1051, and so I move the committee report and House Bill 1051.
All right, to the committee report.
Nice position on this.
Sorry, we're coming to a compromise here. This is bipartisanship in action.
Bipartisanship with the podium.
All right, who's it going to be? Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Representative Valdez. And so, members, what we have before us is 1051. We did extensive stakeholding. We had conversations with multiple organizations. And what we're just trying to do here is try and fix a circular argument that seems to exist in existing statute currently, and by that bring forth 1051. We did hear from several organizations. We heard from CML, we heard from the Special Districts Association, we heard from school districts, and all seem to be in agreement that 1051 would bring them some of the clarity in which they have been seeking for some time now.
Representative Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, thank you for giving us some of your time this morning to consider House Bill 1051. The bill is of critical importance in helping our various state and local governments in their efforts to recruit the very best talent to serve in chief executive leadership positions. Under current law, anytime a state public body needs to hire a chief executive officer and only 3 or fewer people apply for the job, all of the applicants, no matter whether they are being seriously considered for the job, must be deemed a finalist under the law, and their identities and applications materials therefore must be made public. This is a particularly difficult problem for smaller rural governments. The law has had a chilling effect on these governments' ability to attract enough qualified applicants to key leadership roles. And you can see why this would be so. Putting yourself in the role of a rural city manager or school superintendent, for example. Assume you're currently employed, but you see an opportunity that better matches your skill set or might allow you to grow professionally in a neighboring city or school district. The problem is that everyone knows everyone, and as soon as you apply for that other potentially better opportunity, your current employer and colleagues are very likely to find out. So unless you are ready to lose your current job, once your current employer finds out you're looking for something else, you're probably not going to apply for that other job. So we have this problem because our current laws don't strike the right balance between honoring the public's interest in a transparent hiring process, the public's interest in being able to attract the very best talent, and also, though, members, the right of private individuals to have their job searches and employment interest kept confidential. Right now, we have vigorous laws on the books that protect the public's right to know and a transparent hiring process. We have open meetings laws that require an open meeting to be held to establish job search goals, open meetings where the public is encouraged to provide input on all of the job search goals. And also, once the finalist has been determined, there's a 14-day waiting period between the time that that individual is announced and introduced to the community, and the community at that time has 2 full weeks to get to know that candidate, ask questions, do their research, and provide their public input. So we are working hard to strike a good balance, maintaining transparency in a hiring process, but also at the same time protecting private individuals' identities and allowing them the ability to do a job search and keep their private information confidential. So we're retaining all transparency requirements that shine light on the government's process, and respectfully ask for your yes vote on this bill today.
Further discussion on the committee report. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll go ahead and reserve my comments for the bill when we actually get to the bill. But the reason I'm here speaking on the committee report is because I have an amendment that I want to offer, and I'll move L002 and ask that it be displayed.
All right. Stand by while we get it displayed.
Sure.
L002 is displayed. Please proceed, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, members, I certainly respect what the bill sponsors are trying to do, especially as it relates to chilling effects on potential applicants. But I do feel like, absent the amendment that I'm offering here, that this goes a bit too far. So what I'd like to do with the amendment is narrow the scope so that what the proponents are trying to do would only apply to school boards and to education boards, because that was a big part of the discussion they had in committee. I know certainly from my neck of the woods, we had members of Academy School District 20 talk about this, and okay, I'm willing to say, okay, I recognize that there's a problem here. So let's go ahead and give these school boards and higher education institutions the ability to have what the bill sponsors want to accomplish, but let's leave everyone else out of the equation for transparency's sake. During debate, during the committee, you had opposition from a number of people that were concerned about transparency and being able to have this information open and disclosable. And in this amendment, I'm trying to seek a balance where both sides can kind of live with something that helps resolve the underlying issue that the bill sponsors address. So please vote yes.
Representative Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, first, I'm grateful to Representative Williams for wanting to have some more dialogue about this bill. I'll let you know that the challenge that we're attempting to address doesn't only affect small governments. What this is, we have a challenge anytime there's a small hiring pool. So anytime there are 3 or fewer qualified applicants who apply for a job, all 3 of them must be considered a finalist. But I'll point out, if there are 4 qualified applicants, this rule doesn't apply. The hiring body is within its rights to just name 1 finalist, and that is the letter of the law. I see that there are some references to other governmental entities here, some other controversies that are stirring up, and you ought to know this is only, what we're talking about is in the case of 3 or fewer qualified applicants. If you have 1 finalist, allow the entity to only name 1 finalist. And again, anytime there are more than 3 qualified applicants within the letter of the law, you can name only 1 finalist.
All right, Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Representative Valdez. And so, members, I would just ask for a no vote as well. Representative Williams, while I appreciate you bringing forth the amendment, it would have been great to have some sort of a dialogue about it. This is the first I'm hearing about it, the first I've seen it, and I think that maybe there is a way we probably could have found some sort of a conversation that we could have had. We did look at reducing it just to school districts. However, what we heard in testimony, and that hasn't been mentioned here yet, is that we actually heard from the concerns specifically as it relates to our fire districts. We have fire districts obviously all throughout the state, probably more important in our rural communities than maybe even our metro areas in some degree as we face forest fires and such. And what they actually pointed out to us was that they have candidates that will apply for these positions from out of state. And I can see the need for bringing talent from outside the state. And that they look at the statute as currently written, and those applicants, once they have that level of realization of what Colorado statute already has, they actually back out. And so as we're looking to diversify, I guess, the talent pool of how we go about keeping our communities safe through fighting fires, it's a shame that the existing statute actually turns off some of that talent because they feel that they could otherwise be exposed and maybe lose their job in the state that they're actually applying from. So to say that we should just reduce this to school districts doesn't offer remedy in the statute that is currently not working for our fire districts and other districts. And that was just one example. I just want to make sure that the chamber knew of that example that was brought forward through testimony, and they were actually in support of the bill.
Representative Byrd.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to add to my co-prime's comments, we're also hearing from rural water districts. So this is happening mostly in our smaller communities, again, where they attract smaller talent pools, smaller applicant pools. And anyhow, it's a broad challenge.
All right, further discussion on the amendment, Representative Sandrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to give a little history about this amendment and actually the bill. This idea for this bill was brought to me about 1.5 years, 2 years ago from my district, school district, Academy District 20. They had an issue which this bill could have solved, and I'm getting to the amendment. But at that time, it was straight for education for K through 12, and it was a good idea. And I was actually originally asked by a D20 board member to run this bill. So then it morphed into for higher ed, which I think I see an opportunity where this bill could help. But then it morphed into something bigger, and that's what concerns me. I was under the impression that this amendment was going to be ran actually during committee to refine it back to the original essence of the bill. wasn't really, truthfully, I wasn't really getting that much information at all about what was going on, but I was somewhat under the impression that this was going to be ran. So, so I was actually surprised this amendment wasn't ran during committee. But I think we need to, I think there's areas of this bill that's getting more politicized as it broadens. I think it'd be nice to bring it back to the original essence of the bill, the original idea for education, because if we make it broader, we're getting into some unintended consequences with different areas. And maybe that'd be wise for a second bill, so we can have that conversation. But I stand in support of this, this amendment. I really questioned at the end of the day, last committee, I wasn't sure if I was going to vote for this bill, even though it was broad, but gosh, I had some heartburn as it broadens. So it was, I voted for it, but it was difficult because I knew it was going to help my area. This started in my area. I approved of the essence of the bill. I actually talked to the board member, and he was surprised. It was actually, the bill took a broader range too. So I think we need to go back to the true essence of the bill, and because there's some unintended consequences of broadening it, and that's what this amendment does. It brings it back to more of the beginning. I stand in favor of the amendment. Thank you.
All right, Representative Neville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I would actually share the same sentiments as Representative Sanders. I too thought that this amendment might be run in committee. We were told there was an amendment. We didn't get to see the amendment in committee until it got distributed and moved. And we voted for the amendment, but the amendment was it wasn't a big amendment that actually was moved in committee. It just allowed some of the demographic data to be shared if the candidate actually shares it. It wasn't anything as significant as this. This amendment does kind of narrow the scope of the bill in a major way. I think that's appropriate because you take a look at some of these, if you're appointing a superintendent, something like that, you're really education focused, where I think there's some others that should have a much higher standard. If you take a look at a county commissioner board, getting ready to appoint maybe a county manager, I mean, you're talking huge amounts of funds that could be moved around. You want to make sure that there is no impropriety going on, that they're not hiring someone that maybe was a supporter of the campaign for a certain thing, that they truly are picking the best person. And really the only way to do that, they say that sunshine is the best disinfectant. And so having more sunshine on that process is a better thing. So, I mean, I'm not sure if I even like this just on school boards and higher education boards, but I think when you get to those levels, you're talking major things. Is a road going to get approved in a certain area because of political favors or not? So I think that this amendment does narrow the scope and gets us back on track to actually solving the problem that is out there currently, and it's very public with the lawsuits. Right now, I'm not hearing a lot of lawsuits happening with things like boards of county commissions and other boards. It's really specifically to education. So if we're just trying to solve that lawsuit issue with boards of education, this would narrow it down to that.
Representative Van Winkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I completely agree. I asked for a yes vote on this because this is what it seems like the bill sponsors are trying to get at. Now, I still have some heartburn because when it comes to hiring the superintendent of a Douglas County, a Jefferson County, Denver County, these are big positions. They pay $300,000-$400,000 a year. They are responsible to the taxpayers, to the school board, and I think they should be it should still be an open and transparent process. This bill, as it stands now, not only takes away the transparency that has been long-standing for school boards and the CU regents, but it takes it away from everything, from the director of CDOT, Department of Revenue, down to your city council, down to your county commissioners, your county managers, city managers. These are big jobs that are responsible to the taxpayers. And right now the bill is so incredibly broad and takes away so much transparency that this amendment would at least get us moving in the right direction, where the bill would still close off transparency for our school boards, our superintendents, those CEO positions, and the C board regents, but at least it's not as damaging towards transparency for all levels of government, from the executive branch, from the gubernatorial appointments, down to city councils and CEOs of counties. So I ask for a yes vote. Thank you, members.
Representative Pico.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually going to disagree and say that I recommend you vote against this amendment. While I was on City Council and the Board of Direction Utilities, we were involved in making two selections that would make this kind of issue pertinent, both for our Executive Director for the Utilities as well as for our Area Council of Governments. And of interesting that PPACG and Dr. Cog were both in the market for a Executive Director at the same time. And we were both watching each other's applicants rather closely. So this isn't just an education issue. It's across the board. It goes into a number of other areas. So I recommend voting against the amendment and for the bill.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly respect the arguments that some of our members would have against this amendment, but I would remind everyone here that what we're doing, absent this amendment, is we're having a broad policy exception to transparency, to Colorado open records requests. The bill itself, was opposed by the Press Association, and for good reason. And so, it's hard to talk about this amendment without talking about the bill, so I won't do that. But I will say that it does dramatically curtail public access to this information that should be available to the taxpayers. I mean, we're talking about making major hiring decisions, or allowing these boards, these public bodies, to make major hiring decisions and not necessarily disclose what they normally would disclose under the circumstances. And I understand the chilling effect argument, so I'll save that piece of it for when we actually get to the bill. But suffice it to say that that these individuals, while seeking some sort of public position, they do have to be okay with being scrutinized a little bit more, because it is a public position. This is taxpayer dollars we're talking about. And this bill as written is too broad. We're essentially saying every public body, every entity that uses taxpayer dollars doesn't have to do what they've been normally doing up until this point. And that's, I think, a dangerous thing for us a dangerous direction for us to go down. And so if we can narrow this to where the problem is, at least we're being told where the problem is, then I think that's a win for everyone involved. If school boards, especially those rural ones, are having trouble finding applicants because of this, okay, fine. Let's let them benefit from what the underlying bill does, and only them, because there are too many positions out there that we shouldn't just take away sort of that sunshine that makes sure that everything is working in the proper way. So please vote yes on this amendment.
Is there any further discussion on L002? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of L002. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. The noes have it. L002 is lost. To the bill. Is there any further discussion? Oh, to the committee report. I'm sorry. Back to the committee report, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have one more amendment. I anticipated that perhaps my prior amendment would not work, so I went ahead and narrowed it a little less with this next amendment. So I move L003 and ask it to be displayed.
All right, L003 has been moved. Stand by for just 1 second.
Sure.
Please proceed, Representative Williams.
Thank you. So in the previous amendment, it just was for school boards and, of course, higher education boards. But in this one, I also include local public body as defined in 24-6-402. This expands it a little bit more so that there can be flexibility for those local public boards. It's not something that I particularly love because the bill itself I think is problematic with respect to transparency and being able for people to, or for bodies to adhere to CORA. However, I'm trying to find a sweet middle ground for everyone, and so I'm expanding what we're talking about for institutions such as municipal bodies or county commissions and what have you, including school boards. The one thing that I don't think we should be in the business of is, certainly allowing our state executive agencies this ability to shield their applicants and people who could be considered as finalists. This, again, I think helps get us closer to what the bill sponsors are trying to do. It's certainly not something that's perfect for me, but at the very least, let's make sure that our state executive level departments are not benefiting from what this bill, without the amendment, is trying to accomplish. So please vote yes on this.
Further discussion on L003? Representative Van Winkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, I urge a yes vote on this. Again, this still allows the bill sponsors to remove a key form of transparency from lots of levels of government, from lots of hiring and firing decisions, but not firing decisions, hiring decisions. But what it does allow still is it still allows a little light, a little transparency for the statewide executive level CO positions. Think about this. The head of the Department of Revenue, for example, that person oversees all taxation for businesses, for every tax-paying, hardworking taxpayer in the state of Colorado. The head of Department of Revenue does more than that, though. They oversee our auto industry. They oversee the marijuana enforcement division. They oversee gaming, liquor, tobacco, racing, 15 other things. These are very important jobs. We can't allow transparency to be taken away from them. So essentially what this bill does is it limits it simply to huge CEO, governor, statewide positions. At least for statewide positions for the governor appointments, we would get the people of Colorado could still have a bit of transparency, and so I ask for a yes vote on this.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Representative Valdez. And so, members, I rise and ask for a no vote on L003. And to respond to gutting transparency, I think it's a little desperate and disingenuous. We're not gutting transparency. The 14-day period is still there. The records are still available for inspection. In fact, we even added demographic information as well. So to say that the transparency is being gutted is just not accurate. And I'm not sure which is worse, existing statute or that 1051 is attempting to address, or Amendment L003, which actually further frustrates existing statutes. So again, I would ask for a no on L003.
Is there any further discussion on L003? Representative Van Winkle.
Mr. Chair, and I do believe it is accurate to say that this bill removes transparency, because it does. That's actually all the bill does, is under this amendment, that level of transparency will be removed for everything except for the big statewide offices that our governor, those appointments that he makes. So it's only for those appointments for statewide offices from the governor under this amendment. Everything else, you can get rid of transparency for that. And to say that there's already transparency in the process, of 14-day waiting period, that actually has nothing to do with this bill. That has nothing to do with who applies for the position, because the criteria used to screen candidates is not enough information for the public to effectively monitor and hold accountable important decisions like these big CEO positions. So I urge this body to at least do our job as a legislative branch and have some, and not just give the executive branch on these big CEO positions carte blanche to hire potentially friends to sweetheart deals. Now, I'm not saying Governor Polis would do that. Many of his appointments are terrific people that are running these departments. Some of them, I would hire different people, but that's okay, because right now, at least there's transparency there. In the taxpayers of Colorado, the legislative branch has at least a little bit of transparency there on what's happening within the executive branch. So this is just a simple check and balance on our executive branch that we would not get rid of transparency for at least those positions. I ask for a yes vote.
All right, any further discussion about L003? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of Amendment L003. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. The noes have it. L003 is lost. To the committee report. Any further discussion on the committee report? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the committee report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee report is adopted. To the bill. Is there any further discussion? No. Representative Van Winkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very disappointed to see those amendments fail because now this bill removes a key form of transparency from everything from the CEOs of our huge statewide government departments down to school districts, down to little counties and municipal governments. This bill, I believe, is a solution in search of a problem because for years now, government bodies have been able to attract top-notch, highly qualified applicants for these CEO positions under existing law. And as we've seen just in Jefferson County this week or last week, I think it was last week, there's actually not a problem here. It's a solution in search of a problem, but more importantly, this bill deprives the public of a long-standing form of transparency, a key form of transparency that our press depends on and our public depends on. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, it robs taxpayers of a key form of accountability because when there is transparency, there is also accountability. I ask for a no vote on this bill.
Further discussion on House Bill 1051. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, I'm disappointed that none of the amendments passed since I ran them, but I ran them because I do feel strongly about this. And when I first got here, and we started talking about issues with respect to transparency or Cora, these were issues that I certainly cared about, and that's something that I wish to remain consistent with. And the way I see it is this bill would dramatically curtail public access, to the application materials submitted by finalists for chief executive officer positions at state and local government entities. And by authorizing public bodies to announce only a single finalist and thereby hide the names and application materials of other candidates who were actually interviewed for the open position. I'm sorry, that's just not good governance. We have a higher standard because we are dealing with taxpayer dollars. I echo everything that Representative Van Winkle has already said, but I want to point out that the bill itself, makes this claim. It makes a claim that there's a chilling effect with respect to potential applicants that are qualified, but they may themselves not apply for these positions because they don't want their information to go out in public. And that's certainly something I sympathize with, but there was an article that was recently written by the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition. And I think it's very important that we discuss what it says. It says, here's the title, Colorado Lawmakers Advance Bill Allowing Disclosure of One Finalist for University President, School Superintendent, and other Chief Executive positions. State lawmakers Thursday advanced legislation that would let public bodies in Colorado disclose just one finalist when choosing a new chief executive, such as a city manager, school district superintendent, or university president. House Bill 1051, which passed the House Business Affairs and Labor Committee, rewrites portions of the Colorado Open Records Act and the Colorado Open Meetings Law that have been the subject of recent litigation. 2 district court judges determined that the open government laws require that the public naming of multiple chief executive finalists. But a panel of the Colorado Court of Appeals reversed one of those decisions earlier this month, ruling 2-1 that the University of Colorado Regents did not violate Cora when they released only Mark Kennedy's application for the CU presidency to the Boulder Daily Camera in 2019. As currently written, Colorado's open meeting law requires the list of all finalists under consideration for a chief executive position be made public no later than 14 days prior to the appointment of one of the finalists. Cora defines a finalist as a member of the final group of applicants or candidates made public under the requirements of the open meetings law and allows the public to inspect most records submitted by a finalist. It adds, if only 3 or few applicants or candidates for the chief executive officer position possesses the minimum qualification for the position, said applicants or candidates shall be considered finalists. The bill introduced repeals the Cora provision regarding 3 or fewer applicants and specifies that a state or local public body shall name 1 or more candidates as finalists for the position of chief executive officer. Public bodies still would be required to disclose the finalist 14 days before an appointment is made. Testifying in favor of HB 21-1051 were lobbyists for the Colorado Association of School Boards, the Colorado Municipal League, and the Special District Association of Colorado. Each said local governments have a difficult time attracting highly qualified applicants for chief executive positions because potential candidates know that their names and applications might be made public if they become finalists. Why is this bill necessary? Simply because far too many excellent candidates will not apply if they know their names will be made public too. That was said from Tom LaValle, a member of the Academy School District 20 Board in Colorado Springs. The Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition asked committee members to amend the bill to require the disclosure of multiple finalists, noting that the public has a profound interest in who is being seriously considered to fill taxpayer-funded chief executive positions. If searches are conducted in secret, the community and the news media have no way of knowing whether a diverse range of candidates received consideration. They also have no opportunity to compare the backgrounds and applications of finalists and no opportunity to conduct their own research on the finalists. These are not typical hires. They work alongside elected officials and political appointees to set the course of major civic institutions. And that was the testimony from Tim Reagan Porter, the CEO of the Colorado Press Association. He goes on to say, transparency into the selection process, and in particular to the candidate given serious consideration, is an important right of the public in order to hold their government accountable. This bill destroys that ability, and is antithetical to the spirit of CORA. In written testimony submitted to the committee by Frank Lamonte, director of the University of Florida's Brenchner Center for Freedom of Information, cited his organization's research on closed versus open searches for public university presidencies. And I want to emphasize this point because it gets to the heart of the argument that there's a chilling effect here. Quote, if the assertion that a closed search produces better outcomes were accurate, we would expect to find that more people leave prestigious higher education jobs for presidency in closed search states as opposed to open search states. However, we found no such evidence. There was no discernible distinction in the credentials of the hires made in states with closed searches versus those that conduct open searches. Lamonte noted that the resignation this week of Oregon State University President F. King Alexander, who was under scrutiny for his handling of sexual misconduct allegations at Louisiana State University while president of that school. Quote, had Alexander's name been aired publicly as a finalist prior to the hiring decision, it is likely that the questions about his performance at LSU, for instance, his decision to make himself unavailable to the law firm hired to investigate Title IX noncompliance, would have become known to the search committee, enabling the committee to thoroughly evaluate Alexander alongside any competing candidates. Members, I don't think this is particularly good policy because it does run afoul of CORA, or at least the spirit of it. I know we're trying to amend it and create greater flexibility, but I would submit to you that we shouldn't be doing that. That we need more information, we need more transparency, we need more sunshine into the processes that we have. And if we're not going to do that, then we're going to get worse outcomes. We should never, ever want to shield this type of information from the taxpayers, from the public, from the media. This is why the Press Association came out against this so strongly, and I think it's why every one of us should oppose this bill as written. I don't know if there's an opportunity to amend this even further to try and reconcile some of the issues that are at stake here. But I don't think it's good public policy, it's good governance to allow these individuals to not have to be disclosed, especially since the taxpayers deserve nothing less. And so I'm going to vote for transparency, I'm going to vote for more disclosure, I'm going to vote for the taxpayers, and I'm going to make sure with my vote that we're honoring the commitments that we made when we decided to step up and serve the people and the taxpayers. So please vote no on this bill.
Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Representative Valdez. And, members, I think that there was just, I appreciate the article that Rep. Williams just read, and I think he's absolutely right because the bill does say shall name one or more candidates, one or more. One or more, one or more, one or more. That's not like we're just saying there's only going to be one. We're not trying to create flexibility. The premise is off. We're trying to fix existing statute. And if there was a genuine concern, I think, all due respect to my colleague from the Springs, we would have spent more time talking about this in person than he spent talking here in the well. If there's an opportunity to amend, this is the first time I'm seeing these amendments, and we're asked to sit here and entertain these ideas, but never floated them to the sponsor. So if we're looking for an opportunity to amend, I'm happy to see if we can't find an opportunity to amend, but it's got to start with a conversation. So the genuineness concerns that you have, I'm just really not sure are there. Members, there's no disruption to transparency here. It says one or more. Nothing prohibits any body from naming more than one. 14 days are still there and available for the public to weigh in. If a finalist is offered and put forth, and it's the only finalist that's put forth, and something comes out in those 14 days, there's no obligation. The contract hasn't been signed. The public process is still there. We're not creating flexibility. We're not destroying transparency. These are false premises. The bill speaks for itself. And so I would urge a yes vote on 1051.
Representative Neville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, the reason we're talking about this now is because there were many of us, I sat on the committee, and we were told that there was going to be an amendment that was brought forward. We asked the sponsor, can we see the amendment? The amendment was not brought to us until it was actually moved in committee. The amendment did not address any concerns that we had, so we tried to give deference to the sponsor before committee, and the amendment, we didn't see it. It didn't address any of these concerns that we have. I don't think it is a false premise to say that this is getting rid of a lot of high level of transparency. Right now, it's all a matter of perspective. So if you have 5 or 3 qualified candidates, you might be able to look at that as an objective observer, and this is why the Associated Press is against it too, and say, well, wow, this one particular candidate was more qualified than the finalist they chose, but that finalist that they chose was owed political favors by the people on the board. But when you don't have that perspective and you can't take a look at the entire pool, you don't have the full transparency. And so, happy to work on this further, look at other amendments. Again, like I said, we didn't have the amendments, at least I sat on the committee, didn't have the amendment until it was moved in committee. And so that's why we're trying to amend it here on the floor. I urge a no vote on this bill.
All right, any further discussion? Representative Holtorf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, esteemed colleagues. I am troubled by the discussion about transparency because a lot of times these decisions are made in these high-profile positions, and we call them the insider deal. Another way is calling them the drug deal. The drug deal was made for this person. They're the inside candidate. If you do something like this, it takes transparency out. Is the candidate even qualified? Is it best qualified? Most qualified? Qualified? Or is it nepotism, where you got a family member that's getting moved into a position? Or is it a political favor or some other drug deal that's going on? If you have this, then those finalists are all kind of behind closed doors until that decision is made. And I believe that lack of transparency in that final selection isn't really what we should be promoting in this chamber. In fact, I would argue we should promote uber transparency, more transparency than less, in the public policy that we promulgate. So I do have reservations and concerns. Public information applicants for public employment. And what I understand this, and correct me if I'm wrong, bill sponsors, because I get confused from time to time, as I try to do the job of representing House District 64. But public information. So this doesn't promote more public information for public employment. And I just want the question answered. But rather, it reduces public information applicants for public employment. If that's what the bill does, then not only I'm not excited about it, I'm against it. Less transparency in public service is not a good thing. More transparency is a good thing. So I'm a little concerned about the insider deals, the drug deals, the other deals that are made as we talk about selecting these high-level candidates that have a huge impact on the future of a school district, a county, a state department, the highest levels of government. So I'm going to ask the bill sponsors just to clarify that in my mind, because I want more transparency, not less, at every level of government. That is what I demand of myself. That is what I would demand of others. That is what I would demand in legislation that we promulgate in this chamber.
All right, is there any further? Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Representative Valdez. So members, there's no disruption to transparency here. I think that is, the premise is off. You know what is bad is the lawsuits that have been floating around. I can tell you that one particular school district has already estimated they've spent $250,000. $250,000 trying to defend what is broken in statute, trying to navigate a path where it's broken in statute. Those are taxpayers' dollars that are otherwise not going into the classroom for recruitment, for retention, that are otherwise being spent on litigation because the statute is broken. The 14-day period is still there. Limiting this simply to the sphere of education is not appropriate, because we've also heard from our fire districts which have the same thing, and they, in many cases, actually have even less money to work through litigation. So the purpose of the bill is not to damper transparency, because it doesn't do that. Nothing disrupts the 14 days. Nothing says that you shall only name one finalist. These are all just false premises. And so, members, I would encourage us to vote yes on 1051. Let's bring some clarity to statute where clarity hasn't existed. And let's not otherwise tie up taxpayers' dollars in the courtroom when they could be better spent on firefighting apparatuses, on teachers, on students. Let's fix the statute that's broken and get to a point where we are better serving the community.
Representative Holtorf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Representative Geithner, for pointing that out. But in these legal challenges, I think if you look at those, and yes, it is a shame that that money is invested in a legal challenge that has arisen. But what causes the impetus for the legal challenge? Well, in many cases, it is a question of transparency. It is a question of full disclosure. It is a question of honesty and integrity and transparency in the selection process. And because of that, then a forthcoming legal challenge arises. Going right back to the real issue: transparency. Is there full, honest transparency in these processes? This particular bill, I believe, would eliminate that, based on my understanding, to some degree. And that is not something that I support in any process. No disrespect to my colleague whatsoever. But in most cases, when there is no issue, there is no legal challenge, ladies and gentlemen, with a few exceptions. So Thank you, Mr. Chair and esteemed colleagues. I still have reservations with regard to the intent of this legislation.
Is there any further discussion on 1051? Representative Luck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a very long conversation and have just found more questions that I need answered, but I wanted to take a moment and just thank Representative Byrd for seeking to balance three different key interests. And whether I agree with how that balance all comes out in the wash or not, I just wanted to say thank you for identifying all of those things and trying to work for a solution.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of House Bill 1051. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. 1051 is passed. Madam Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to lay over the balance of the calendar until tomorrow, Wednesday, March 31st.
Seeing no objection, the balance of calendar will be laid over. Madam Assistant Majority Leader.
I move the committee rise and report.
All right, you've heard the motion. Seeing no objection, the committee will rise and report.
House will come to order. Mr. Gregorio, please read the report of the Committee of the Whole.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee of the Whole begs leave to report it as under consideration the following attached bills being second reading therefore and makes the following recommendations thereon. House Bill 1051 is amended. House Bill 1121 is amended, passed on second reading and ordered engrossed and placed on the calendar for third reading and final passage. Senate Bill 12 laid over till 3/31/2021 and retained their place on the calendar.
Representative A. Valdez. You've heard the motion. There are amendments at the desk. So there's 3 amendments at the desk. Mr. Gregorio, please read the Soper and Geithner amendment to the Committee of the Whole.
Representative Soper and Geithner move to amend the report of the Committee of the Whole to reverse the action taken by the committee in not adopting the following Soper Amendment L010 to House Bill 211121 to show that said amendment passed and that House Bill 211121 is amended passed.
Representative Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the Soper Amendment to the Committee of the Whole report and ask that it be displayed.
That has been properly moved and displayed. Representative Soper to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an amendment that we talked about. It is more adding a legislative declaration to the bill to talk about that it's the intent of the General Assembly to encourage landlords and tenants to enter into written contracts rather than oral contracts. And I would ask for a yes vote. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Representative Jackson.
We have discussed this thoroughly. I ask for no vote.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the Soper Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Gregorio, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Those participating remotely, Madam Majority Leader, how do you vote?
No.
Madam Majority Leader votes no. Representative McLaughlin, how do you vote?
No.
Representative McLaughlin votes no. Representative Harrod is excused. Representative Burnett, Bockenfeld, Carver, Ricks, Snyder. Representative Burnett is excused. Please close the machine. With 28 aye votes, 33 no votes, and 4 excused, the Soper amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole is lost. Mr. Gregorio, please read the first Williams amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole.
Representative Williams moved to amend the report of the Committee of the Whole to reverse the action taken by the committee not adopting the following Williams Amendment L002 to House Bill 21-1051 to show that said amendment passed and that House Bill 21-1051 is amended passed.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the first Williams Amendment.
It has been properly moved and it has been displayed to the amendment. Representative Williams.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So members, I mean, we had a pretty good debate on this, but I feel strongly about this. What absent this amendment, what this bill does is it does remove transparency, it does remove accountability that's already in place. And so this amendment, what it would do is it would narrow the scope of this bill to only deal with school boards. That's certainly what we heard in testimony. I know there were other things that were heard in testimony, but as it was pitched leading up to the committee and this debate, it seemed like the big problem had to do with school boards, especially those rural school boards. So if that's where the problem is, let's narrow it to those entities, and let's not remove transparency and accountability for the taxpayers and for the public as it relates to any other governing boards. Please vote yes.
Representative Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I respectfully request a no vote.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the first Williams Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Gregorio, please open the machine and members proceed to vote. Madam Majority Leader, how do you vote?
No.
Madam Majority Leader votes no. Representative McLaughlin, how do you vote?
No.
Representative McLaughlin votes no. Representative Harrod, we are on the first Williams Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. How do you vote?
No.
Representative Harrod votes no. Representative McCluskey, please close the machine. 15 aye votes, 47 no votes, 3 excused. The first Williams Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole is lost. Mr. Gregorio, please read the second Williams Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole.
Representative Williams moved to amend the report of the Committee of the Whole to reverse the action taken by the committee not adopting the following Williams Amendment L003 to House Bill 21-1051 to show that said amendment passed and that House Bill 21-1051 is amended passed.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the second Williams Amendment to the Committee of the Whole.
That has been properly moved and displayed. Please proceed, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So members, what this would do is it would expand a little bit from school boards and also include local boards as defined in statute. Representative Van Winkle during seconds came down and talked about how there are high-level positions within state agencies that should not be beneficiaries to what the bill sponsors are purporting to do. And I agree with him on that, and that's why I'm running this amendment now. So, we want to be able to make sure that these finalists, especially for state agencies in the governor's office or within the executive departments under the governor's purview, are complying with transparency to the utmost. So I would ask for a yes vote on this, and if we're trying to help the situation, then let's at least narrow it to these local boards and, of course, these school boards. Please vote yes.
Representative Byrd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to get it right this time. I respectfully request a no vote.
Is there any further discussion on the second Williams Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole? Seeing none, the question before us is the adoption of the second Williams Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Gregorio, please open the machine and members please proceed to vote. Representative Madam Majority Leader Escar, how do you vote?
No.
Madam Majority Leader votes no. Representative McLaughlin, how do you vote?
No.
Representative McLaughlin votes no. Representative Harrod, how do you vote?
No.
Representative Harrod votes no. Please close the machine. 24 aye votes, 38 no votes, and 3 excused. The second Williams Amendment to the report of the Committee of the Whole is lost. There are no further amendments at the desk. The question before us is the adoption of the report of the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Gregorio, please open the machine, and members, please proceed to vote. Madam Majority Leader, how do you vote?
Yes.
Madam Majority Leader votes yes. Representative McLaughlin, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative McLaughlin votes yes. Representative Harrod, how do you vote?
Yes.
Representative Harrod votes yes. Representative Bockenfeld. Please close the machine. 39 aye votes, 23 no votes, and 3 excused. The report of the Committee of the Whole is adopted. Announcements and introductions. Representative Weissman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Judiciary members, reminder, we still have work to do on adjournment. We will gavel in and do roll call and get going 5 minutes after we recess here. Please be prompt in getting down to 107. Thank you.
Representative Lontine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Health Committee and those of you who have bills in front of the Health Committee this morning, we will start promptly 10 minutes upon adjournment. Please be there quickly. Thank you.
Representative Molka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a tribute I'd like to be read at length, please.
State of Colorado, the House of Representatives, convened in the 73rd General Assembly, hereby commemorates March as Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month. Bleeding disorders, the inability to form a proper blood clot, are characterized by extended bleeding after injury, surgery, or other trauma. If not treated effectively, bleeding disorders can lead to significant malady and can be fatal. More than 1,000 Colorados are affected by bleeding disorders, including hemophilia. More than 3.2 million Americans are affected by the blood clotting disorder, Van Willenhand disease alone. Efforts to promote awareness of bleeding disorders further the prevention of illness, unnecessary procedures, and disability, and promote a greater sense of community and shared purpose among individuals with bleeding disorders. The Colorado House of Representatives proudly commemorates March as Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month in the state of Colorado. On request of Representative Kyle Mullica, given this 30th day of March, March 2021, State Capitol, Denver.
Representative Molka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members, for taking the time to recognize Coloradans whose lives are impacted by bleeding disorders. Considered rare, more than 1,000 Coloradans suffer from bleeding disorders, including hemophilia and other inheritable bleeding disorders. Unfortunately, access and affordability varies. The Colorado chapter of the National Hemophilia Foundation has been an active voice for patients, and today we recognize March as Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month in Colorado, and we want to draw awareness to these disorders and work to a better future for our patients. So thank you for that.
Any further discussion on the tribute? Thank you for the tribute, Representative Molka. Madam Assistant Majority Leader Gonzalez Gutierrez.
Does he have to do some stuff still? Does he need to do any work? Yeah.
We'll do reports of committees of reference.
Committee on Agriculture, Livestock, and Water. After consideration on the merits, the committee recommends the following. House Bill 1223 be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation. Committee on Finance. After consideration on the merits, the committee recommends the following. House Bill 1021 be amended as follows and be so amended be referred to the Committee on Appropriations with favorable recommendation. House Bill 1162 be amended as follows and be so amended be referred to the Committee on Appropriations with favorable recommendation. House Bill 1197 be postponed indefinitely. House Bill 1218 be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation.
Sign of bills, resolutions. Oh, you still have more. Sorry, Mr. Gregorio.
Senate Bill 121 be referred to the Committee of the Whole with favorable recommendation. Committee on State, Civic, Military, and Veterans Affairs. After consideration on the merits, the committee recommends the following. House Bill 1053 be postponed indefinitely. House Bill 1086 be postponed indefinitely. House Bill 1088 be postponed indefinitely. House Bill 1170 be postponed indefinitely. House Bill 1176 be postponed indefinitely.
Signing of bills, resolutions, and memorials.
The
Signing
Speaker
of
has
bills,
signed.
resolutions, and memorials will be printed in the Journal. Message from
Mr.
the
Speaker.
Senate. Message from the Senate will definitely be buried in the Journal. Message from the Reviser.
We herewith
Message from the
transmit.
Reviser will be printed in the Journal. Madam Assistant Majority Leader Gonzalez Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do have to compliment you on being able to say the very long name for me. Every time you've gotten it right. Members, I move that the House stand in recess until later today.
Thank you. I see no objection. The House will stand in recess until later today.